Support for Coming Up Next comes from you, my friends. All you have to do is head to comingupnext.com.au, select the platform on which you listen to podcasts, and hit subscribe. It's going to automate your podcast listening experience. You're going to feel real good about supporting the show, and you're going to get a philosophical ramble with one of the world's top creatives each and every week. Welcome. It's Coming Up Next. It's a podcast. You're listening to it. This is Alistair Marks, and this is my show. This is Coming Up Next. Thanks for tuning in to another week of philosophical rambles with creatives on life, on career, and ultimately on what makes us all silly. This is the show. If you didn't tune in last week, if this is your first time tuning in, welcome. Thank you for stopping by. Thanks for choosing Coming Up Next for your oral pleasure. And if you'd like to check out previous episodes, my guest last week was Beck Hill, great Australian comedian living in London. We had an immense chat on her journey through the world of comedy in Australia, in Adelaide, where she grew up, in Melbourne, and then moving over to London, what that's been like, creating paper puppetry. It's a great chat. Do it up, as Mark Maron says. Comingupnext.com.au is where you'll find that and every single other episode that we've done to date, including this week's episode, which you already know because you're already listening to it, which is a conversation with documentary filmmaker Lizzie Kempton. She got a break as a producer on Junior Doctors. She's made some great films, How to Die, Simon's Choice, Chris Packham, Aspergers and Me. She made a documentary on the Manchester bombing called Manchester Bomb, Our Story. I mean, we get into it all. We get very specifically into the idea of storytelling and making it as a documentary director, as a female. You know what? Let's just get into it right now. Coming up next with Lizzie Kempton. Cheers. This is my second PubCast. First was actually with that producer I was telling you about before, with Frank, the guy who I work with over here. Okay. He insisted that we go and drink if we were going to be talking about. Actually, that was the second time I'd interviewed him. But thanks for doing this.
No, to be fair, I should have had an alcoholic drink.
Do you want an alcoholic drink?
Maybe midway through.
All right, halfway through. Yeah. I mean, I was really keen to speak with you, I suppose, because I've spoken with a lot of men who work in the world of documentary film, and I'm very interested in getting kind of equally weighted points of view on, you know, what it takes to make it in any creative field. So I guess I was very interested to speak to you because, you know, for someone who is quite young, you have had a pretty prolific career, I think, already in terms of the work that you've done and where it's screened and how it's been put out into the world. And so you started your career in Manchester, where you're from. Yeah,
so I was going to do law at university. That was the plan. I had a place to do law, and hadn't really thought too much about media. It just wasn't something, you know, where I grew up, it wasn't something that was kind of necessarily talked about as a possible career, really. They were kind of straightforward job options, you know, kind of teacher, lawyer or doctor was kind of up there. And then just before I started university, I just thought, I'm not quite sure actually, and started to think more about, initially, kind of journalism and factual television. And so took a year out and did quite a lot of work, unpaid work experience at different production companies in Manchester, of which there aren't near as many as there are in London. But then realised that actually I enjoyed talking to people and finding out the stories, and that journalistic element was something that I really enjoyed. So then decided to switch the course at university and do broadcast journalism. And during that time, so it was obviously a kind of more news-based degree, less film. And then I graduated and worked as a journalist, because that was kind of the most straightforward path to get into. But I'd been aware at university and was aware quite quickly that I enjoyed elements of news, this kind of story and speaking to people about their experiences, but news wasn't quite the right environment for me because it was extremely fast turnaround. And it meant that at the end of the day I was kind of leaving, and we got through so many news stories that I kind of couldn't remember them and didn't feel there was the space to tell them fully. So then kind of moved to kind of more long form current affairs, because that was the more straightforward move, and then to documentaries. And then it was that's when I was like, gosh, this is what I absolutely, it was just such a passion, like genuinely like a kind of fire in my belly. Like I just loved kind of digging deeper, so the journalistic element came into it, but then the more creative way of telling the stories and taking them in a direction that maybe was less expected.
Right.
Yeah.
So was filmmaking and storytelling, was it something that you always had a curiosity with, like even in your childhood?
Yeah, I think when I think back, I think it was, because there's kind of like, crazy little things. Like I didn't really think about it until kind of recently, and like when my parents have kind of been telling stories, and they were like, when the girls were like 6 or 7, they were playing with prams and dolls, you would literally write stories, and then you'd sit in the lounge and just like read them, and often like out loud, but you were the only one in the lounge, so that idea of story was obviously, unknown at that point, just something that I absolutely loved, and would just take me into a strange little world. And then even kind of very young, at kind of first year of high school, we'd go off on a school trip, and you could be in a group of really random things like outdoor exploring, or I can't remember, like cooking class or whatever. And I always picked this kind of to be on the newspaper. There was like a newspaper thing. It was daft. We were like 11. But looking back, that was exactly where I wanted to be. So there was obviously there's always been a draw, and I enjoy. My friends will often say as well, you never get bored of listening to people talk, and so I'm just, I guess that kind of naturally inquisitive mind. I don't know if it's kind of nosiness, but I genuinely enjoy hearing often things that other people find mundane. I don't, about people's lives, and I'm quite happy to kind of genuinely enjoy listening to people's stories. So I guess if you can then turn that into a job, that is pretty amazing. And I guess if I knew what I knew now, I may have done film or kind of gone down that avenue a bit more when I was younger, but it just wasn't. It just seemed out of the realms of possibility to kind of start going into a really creative world. Journalism seemed a bit more set and a bit more of a possible career than a far more creative film environment. I just didn't know anybody who works in media at all. So even getting into a production company, I literally printed 100 CVs and knocked on doors to get my foot in to make a cup of tea. So it was quite a kind of, it was very much start from the bottom and prove you can make cups of tea,
yeah.
kind of thing.
Do you remember any kind of, I guess, early experiences, like any of those stories that you used to write, or any sort of more specific experiences that you had that might have been influential?
Stories that I used to write? I genuinely can't remember. Do you know what is quite strange? When I was young, when I was a child, oddly, I was a child that my mum would say, you didn't, how other kids could watch cartoons that were total make-believe and, totally imagination, could never have been real. She was like, you would often go for things that are a bit more, seem more mature at the time, but they had some thread of it being possible. and kind of a factual element, which is quite unusual, I guess, for a child. She was like, you just have no engagement with things that were just...
Fantasy.
Fantasy to, you know, just... Yeah, fantasy was fine if it was a kind of possible. But yeah, things that... I guess cartoons that, were kind of not. And so, I don't know, I think there was always a kind of underpinning of real life that would take me somewhere else. And I guess I quite enjoyed listening. I guess my grandfather was probably quite a huge influence because he travelled a lot when he was younger. He was quite adventurous, he was quite a risk taker. And then and throughout his entire life he was quite spontaneous, and he died when he was 89, but he was travelling with my grandmother up until about the age of 82 for kind of 6 months of the year exploring. And I guess it was his story, weirdly, I don't know how that connects as such, but his stories of kind of exciting and exotic places and stories I'd not heard before, I get him to retell, because they weren't stories I was hearing every day. And maybe there was something in that about going off and exploring, there's things that you just don't know, and actually it's quite exciting to go off yourself and find them out, especially with no knowledge beforehand of what you will find, I think.
Sure.
I think probably.
Did you feel as though Manchester was, I know you said before you didn't actually know anyone who worked in media, and so the idea of pursuing a career in media was kind of non-existent. But did you feel as though you grew up in an environment that was conducive to following a creative career? I've got very supportive parents. I've got very open-minded parents who whatever I wanted to do would encourage me to follow that passion and instilled in me that it was possible if I put in the hard work. It would be very hard, but it was possible. But I'd say more generally, not really. I grew up in a school where those creative jobs were kind of shut down quite young. That's just not what happens. That's just not possible. People we know don't do that. Hang on, let's be more realistic. Let's drag you back into this kind of small pool of jobs that you can get, and you'll always earn this, or you'll always, I don't know, you go to work to do a job to earn money, and it's 9 to 5, and that's what you do. That's maybe a bit harsh, but creative jobs were just, where I grew up in the area in my school, I just don't think, in no way were they encouraged at all. It was not feasible. The town where I grew up, and even I'd say Manchester's fantastic, but there wasn't money pumped into arts and culture, and especially at school, which is quite, now I'm kind of going back to that school and trying to encourage them to let me do talks or just allow that kind of broader thinking, and that you can do whatever you want. It sounds really cliche, but you can if you're quite focused and you put your mind to it. Of course you can, because I think often a lot of people get into filmmaking especially, or the creative industries, because they know somebody who can help them get in or give them the confidence to know that it's a possible option, rather than giving up quite early on. Sure.
But then I was aware that Manchester was Manchester also felt quite limited.
Yeah. I actually met someone last week or the week before who was also from Manchester, and she is now a producer on X Factor and Britain's Got Talent, and she was saying she felt like it was actually a great place to cut her teeth in terms of actually being in the system, because there wasn't the same competition that there is in London for those kind of jobs.
Yeah, I guess there's not the same competition, and I think there is a lot of opportunity now up there for entertainment, or factual entertainment, and children's and sport. Documentary, far less so. I kind of started on Tonight with Trevor McDonald, which is a current affairs ITV, programme.
And you were working in your holidays?
Pardon? So I was at university, and I would be, in the holidays from university, and I'd be a runner on kind of any programme for ITV Studios. I'd go one day a week and work as I say, making the tea and copying scripts, but it wasn't really. It was a lucky place to start in a way, because the kind of areas in the UK where you can work in television are kind of London, Birmingham, Manchester, Glasgow, a little bit in Leeds, Cardiff. Unless you live close to those places, you can't. There's not really the opportunity to do the work. So in that way, it was lucky. But the kind of filmmaking that I knew I wanted to do, it isn't possible to do it there, I don't think. Or to work on lots of different productions, or with established directors that you really want to learn from. For whatever reason, unfortunately, there isn't enough being made up there. And there should be more, certainly. But it meant I wanted to come to London. It was exciting for me to move to London, but I guess some people probably don't follow their kind of career path that they want to do documentary because they don't want to make the move to London. It feels like that, the big decision.
Sure, and I guess it could be like, in a literal sense, a scary prospect to move from. Well, I mean, Manchester's not a small town, but like to move from.
No, but it's huge.
Move.
It's massive. Yeah, it's totally different. And I absolutely love London and can't imagine leaving. I might go somewhere abroad, but Manchester, in comparison, I guess it's familiar. It's where I grew up, so it feels quite familiar and quite small. So I'm still enjoying London, but I'm aware that people may not.
Were there any like culture shocks or any kind of like?
I remember moving down and thinking, that kind of total cliche that everyone's going to be rude and obnoxious and push you out of the way, and there wasn't that actually. I find it to be quite. I enjoy it. I feel it's quite a friendly place actually. There is a sense of community because people, the majority of the time, have come from all over the world, so everyone feels a little bit lost in their own way. I guess there was a lot of commenting on my accent. There still is, which is quite odd.
It's that's something that I didn't know about until I moved over to London. The whole like accent and class-based kind of judgment that happens. I mean, I guess I'm kind of doesn't happen to me. So people just go silly Australian, but yeah, it was just not something that I was aware of at all.
No, and I think if you come from another country, that kind of class, because actually my accent, I come from a place that is totally working class, and so that is picked up in my accent, and so it is quite interesting, because actually to work in television, often you've had to work for free, or so you have to come from I'd say a relatively, I don't know, there has to be some sort of support that enables you to do that work experience for free. So you have to come from a certain background most of the time. And also what I did find is in any creative industry, in filmmaking, there's like almost a language that you have to learn. I remember coming down and being quite intimidated being in meetings, and people were using this quite, say flowery language, but it felt quite pretentious. And I would be sat there thinking, I don't really know what people are trying to say. I can't, oh my gosh, I'm not used to speaking in this way. And I guess part of you is, you feel like a bit of an imposter, like I shouldn't be here because I don't speak like these people. But then actually you realise that maybe you have the same ideas as them anyway, or good ideas, and I guess you learn over time. You get confidence, and you also probably do adapt more of that pretentious language and throw it out there. Do you know what I mean? Often it's not necessary. You can probably cut to the point quite clearly, but I think sometimes people need it to sound more creative or
kind of elevates them.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that for me, because I'm from a part of the UK, certainly where people talk very directly, there is no opportunity to be pretentious. People would look at you, my family, my friends would be like, would very quickly be like, sorry, what on earth has happened to you?
Yeah.
Speak like everybody else, who do you think you are? So they kind of do say that to me. But often it's quite but then on the other hand, it's quite nice to go into that like creative, interesting space and think in those kind of more deep, bolder ideas. So it's not just using pretentious language for the sake of it, but it was certainly a learning curve. to be able to adapt in that way.
Sure.
I think.
And so what did you feel like, I mean, what was the purpose of moving to London? Was there a specific job, or was it just to kind of, because this is where you felt like you were going to be able to achieve what you wanted?
Yeah, I think I got to a point in Manchester where I had to go to Newcastle first, and I worked up there on a series about doctors for the BBC, and lived up there for kind of 3 or 4 months on location. And then the jobs in Manchester just weren't, I wasn't getting kind of as excited. They were more factual entertainment. And I was ready for a change. I'd finished university, and I was excited to make the move. My friends were down here. So I managed to get a job working for a production company in London. And it was just, my tactic was kind of, I remember thinking, gosh, there are filmmakers that I know make these amazing films, often single documentaries, and they're the films I really want to make eventually. And that, if ever that kind of, that's where I want to aim. It may not ever happen, but that's what I want to do. And so it was more having on my radar the production companies and the directors and the execs who were making the type of films that I really appreciated.
What were some of your influences?
So there were people like, interesting, I'm working for a company now called Minnow Films that's run by a director called Morgan Matthews, and so I admired Morgan's filmmaking. It was quite unique to other filmmaking I'd seen, and also I looked at what I was watching or read through what production companies had done, and Minnow was one of the companies that I wrote to before moving to London, and kind of said, I watched this and I loved it. They never replied to me. They didn't reply to me. But then there was Vanessa Engel, who had been at the BBC for kind of 25 years. She was another director that I just really enjoyed, her kind of bold, distinct filmmaking style. It was just that distinction, and and I wasn't quite sure how it ended up getting to the point it had been to, but basically I'd started off working on documentaries, like the one called Junior Doctors for BBC Three, for example, and that was a series, and it was brilliant, and it did really, really well. But what I've kind of found early on was that we were on a huge crew. I was a researcher, and everyone was kind of running around all day in a hospital. There was really brilliant people on the production, but everyone was running around all day. Whether you were a researcher or runner, like AP, director, everyone kind of picked up a camera and hoovered up material. And then the edit would start to make 6 films, and there was reams and reams and reams of material, and often not a clear. And this was no one's fault. It's just the way you have to make series. Sometimes, you have 2 teams of, a director and an AP or whatever. In fact, there was reams of material, but actually there was no coherent storytelling in the overall. And I thought, gosh, I don't know if I can do this as a career, because I didn't know how much. It sounds awful, but I didn't really know how much I was using my brain while doing that. Like, I enjoyed capturing the scenes, and each day there was be an interesting story and you capture a small scene, but I just didn't quite know. So, and then it was through. Then I was contacted by Vanessa Engel to work with her as an AP, and then once I started working with Vanessa, then my brain hurt a lot. And Vanessa's extremely organised and a deep thinker and an incredible filmmaker, and every day was challenging. And it wasn't a case of just filming everything that moved and then thinking about what it was going to be afterwards or in the edit. It was very clearly having a sense of what each scene would do and each day would do. So then I was like, oh, hang on, this is really engaging and exciting, because when done properly, you are challenged all the time, all the time. So yeah.
So what was the process going from that to starting to produce some of the films that you made, like How to Die and Aspergers and Me?
It was quite a natural progression. It's quite interesting actually, because I made the tea, and I was a researcher for a decent period of time on different projects in terms of kind of casting and setting up shoots. And been across loads of different things, like doing anything that was asked of me, kind of being willing, just really, really willing to do, and genuinely wanting to do the best job, and learn, and therefore learning all the time. And then I was an AP. For Vanessa on a single and then a series, and then on different films. Some that were shot in the US, one about Mexican immigration, another about women in prison.
What's for people listening who may not know what an AP is? How would you describe that
So
job?
an assistant producer. So I'd say a researcher is, you are doing research and fact checking, and you're going out on shoots with a more experienced, director. You're casting often, and then an AP. I guess there are different levels, and there are totally different roles for an assistant producer on different projects. And my experience working with directors on single films meant that it was a really brilliant relationship for me as an assistant producer, and quite collaborative, because you were working with these directors closely, and you could look then at how they worked, how they made their films, and I guess it started to build that confidence, kind of ideas, and these are the contributors. You'd still be doing all the same work as the researcher, because on these projects there was just you as an assistant producer and the director. That was it, to make an hour-long film or whatever. But I guess it enabled a dialogue with the director, and so, as I say, your ideas were being listened to and then built on, and so it was actually quite common at that point for like those big series to be made, like 24 hours in A&E, or like the thing like Junior Doctors that I was making, or series with 6 or 8 parts and big crews. And actually what happened, people could jump quite quickly. You could be an assistant producer on one series, go back and be a producer, go back the next series and be a director. So people were jumping fast, and I was aware that was a path you could take, but I just felt that I wanted to work on different films, and again with more directors, and interesting directors that I really respected.
Was that because you hoped to learn from them, or because you wanted to produce their work, or was there...
Yeah, I think there was a bit of everything. I wanted to learn from them, work on... I guess I was picking films that I found exciting and was genuinely passionate about. There was a pull of like career and progression, but I'd say in equal measure there was also a pull of what do I enjoy and what do I find exciting, because then you will work so much. You're just so much more motivated. Well, that's what I found I was, and so it was. I worked on films where it's a real privilege to work on them and also produce for brilliant directors. And I guess part of it was confidence as well. That it's like, I don't know if I'm ready to. I don't know if I'll ever direct. I don't know if I'm good enough to direct. And I think part of that actually, I don't know, but I would say that is a female thing. I know a lot of exceptional, really, really exceptional female producers who are all saying the same thing. I don't know if I'm quite good enough to direct, and they absolutely are.
When you say it's a female thing, sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
But when you say it's a female thing, do you mean because there aren't as many females in that position, so you don't have necessarily the role models?
Yeah, I think it's partly that. I think when an industry is so male dominated, that's accepted. That you kind of assume there's some reason for that, and I think it's partly kind of that girls. Well, I don't know. The females that I know that are kind of producing are many are exceptionally good at their job, almost perfectionists, and therefore want to do everything perfectly, and it's hard to make the leap, or there's a sense of imposter syndrome because there aren't so many women. Shooting is a big thing, so that, as I say, when I was an assistant producer, there were a lot of guys who could shoot, who could point a camera, put it in focus, and shoot. And slightly, because biology, they're bigger, so they were given the cameras, or they had the confidence to say, yeah, I can shoot. And then it meant that because they could put the camera in focus and press record, that they were then very quickly propelled to be a director. And often the females, who were the assistant producers, were then producing and not picking up the camera, and then got this fear of not picking up the camera. It was kind of, and when you speak to people who are senior, like exec level or creative director, who have more experience, they say, and this is not my opinion, this is what people have said, that actually, men will go into interviews and say, yeah, I can shoot, and you look at their rushes and you're like, gosh, that's not, it's not great, but actually men are saying, yeah, I can do it straight away. Not necessarily overselling, but when we have the confidence just to do it, so much more. They're all going, no, I'm not very good,
Yeah.
I don't know if I can do it. And actually they can. But so it's not, no one can be blamed as such, but it's just that there are a lot of people that I know that are, that are brilliant producers, that I'm trying to say, just do it, just make the leap, because you will, you will learn the shooting, that how the producing is actually really, really hard. That takes longer to learn, I think.
Yeah.
In a way.
I mean, even though directing is a craft, there's something a lot more instinctive about directing than there is, producing is a lot more pragmatic.
Yeah, but if you don't understand, you don't need to have done it necessarily. I think it's helpful to understand it to get the best film,
Sure.
And sometimes when, I don't know, in my kind of mid to late 20s, everyone was just like, I want to be a director by next year or by the age of 30. It felt it's pressure, isn't there, sometimes, to reach a certain point by a certain age.
Sure. And I think also, if there isn't the same opportunity, which there obviously has not been for women in the film industry or any industry, then, like you say, when you're growing up in an environment where there's no one to kind of look to go, that's what I want to do, unless you have the disposition to want to be some kind of trendsetter or someone to break new ground, it's just not going to occur to you that that's even an option.
And it's not, as I say, it's not anybody's fault and stuff. It's as much the females, I was holding back because I was like, I don't quite know if I'm good enough. So it's as much for you to kind of be bold in that way, I guess.
So what was, going from producing into where you actually did direct something with Manchester Bomb?
So it was kind of I did, I worked with an amazing director called Rowan Deacon, who I'm working with again now, actually. And I worked with Rowan on a film called How to Die, Simon's Choice, and it was through the making of that, I guess working with Rowan gave me confidence. It was extremely collaborative, and there were moments within that as a producer where I was thinking about how I would shoot a scene, or questioning I would do and things like that, and Rowan and I started to be so much on the same page. I was thinking, oh gosh, I'd love to be just doing this. And I started to have a sense of that, because as a producer you set everything, put everything in place, and then obviously the director comes in and films it, etc. And then I worked with Charlie Russell on Aspergers and Me, and Charlie again is lovely and very generous and really, really collaborative, and the same thing was happening. And so I got to a point finally, from a kind of personal point of view, it's like, oh, okay, you seem to know what or it was more like other people were saying you should direct, which obviously for whatever reason I maybe needed other people to say, no, you do know what you're doing a little bit. And so then it's hard to get into directing. It's really, really hard to make that jump, especially when you're kind of an established producer, because people are kind of like, well, that's how they see you as a producer, or they want you as a producer on their project.
They pigeonhole you.
And it's a nice place to be, because if you've established yourself, then you've got the opportunity of some really incredible films to work on and produce. And then to make the leap to director, you obviously have to. The sidestep means that you don't get to work on those films that are, big singles at 9 p.m. about really interesting subjects, because you're not experienced as a director. So there has to be a compromise. And it's, I guess, to be a to make that kind of change, you either have to go and work on a series, you know, and do one episode in a big series, or you know, then you just do something that will get a smaller audience inevitably. And so I applied for the BBC New Director Scheme, and did it that way because it enabled, you know, there was a lot of freedom as to what you could do editorially with that, and make a single film potentially. So I went down that route, but I don't know really if I hadn't got on that. It would have taken a lot of trying to persuade people, I think, to give me a break to make my first film, because it's a risk for people when you've not been, you know, in the full edit yourself and been across something as a director, because there are so many other people they could have. You know, money's an issue, budget, schedule. It's better option to kind of have a safe pair of hands, I think, rather than take a punt on a new director.
Sure, but you were obviously well credentialed enough to get that position.
Well, they picked 6 people. I think there were quite, I don't know if there's 1,000 or 1,500. There's a lot of applicants. But I was like, by that point, I was kind of absolutely desperate for it, like really, really, really wanted it. And I guess because I produce, maybe that enabled a kind of safe pair of hands on one, you know, in a sense, from a kind, you know, the experience of kind of legal compliance, setting up shoots, being across budgets and schedules. It meant that actually I got a lot of experience. So it was, the filming petrified me. Like, I genuinely had sleepless nights because I'd been able to work on productions with directors of photography who were obviously the most beautiful shooters and these amazing directors who had so much more experience. But it was the shooting. I'd never shot anything for broadcast, really, because as a producer working on those single films, you just don't, because either the director's shooting or the director of photography. So on a big series, it's slightly different. Sometimes you can pick up the camera, but I hadn't shot for years, and even I say I had on Junior Doctors in like about 9 years before, and even then it was like dreadful, you know. God knows what I was. So I was absolutely petrified when I got the BBC Directors Scheme. Like, I was excited, like really, really excited, but I'd say as excited, I was petrified, like 50-50. Because I just thought, how do I shoot? Like, what if I can't shoot? What if my shooting is that dreadful? It's unwatchable and it's not going to be beautiful. That was like my big, big concern. But actually, once I was kind of thrown in the deep end, because it's like, well, there was me and an assistant producer, and I had to shoot it. So it was actually good to be that terrified, and it was fine. So,
sink or swim.
It was. But actually, it was the best thing, really, because it was shooting non-stop from kind of September till about February. We had a few DOP days, but that was it. And so, and it improves quite quickly, your shooting. And I think watching amazing directors of photography as well was quite helpful. That I only realised when it came to actually shooting. You don't realise, but when you're watching rushes of people who are amazing shooters, and you're watching the raw rushes, you take in, I think, more than you realise at the time. It's not like kind of rushing around and trying to capture everything or everyone that's moving. You're watching it in a much more calm, you know, that directors of photography are so calm, aren't they, and considered, and they don't move that much. So when I was deep inside, like absolutely panicking, I was also saying, just stay still, hold the shot and keep it in focus.
Most importantly, keep it in focus.
Yeah.
What did you feel like you had learned, maybe consciously or otherwise, from all these years of observing great directors as well as great DPs? I guess about storytelling specifically and the craft.
Yeah, I think that you, to be, I guess there are different elements really. The directors that were exceptional had a mix of two things. One, that they were very organised and considered, like extremely organised. I think people think creative people can't be organised, the two don't go together. But actually they were all very sure of what they were trying to get, but also totally open, entirely open to things going in a different direction and following the story. So rather than having you may have an idea of what you think the film, there has to be an idea of what shape the film is going to take, or what tone it's going to take. But actually, when you're in a story and that's kind of unfolding in front of you, to have the confidence to just kind of push to one side those ideas what it might have been, and just kind of follow it. But also have a clear narrative in your head. The storytelling is kind of utterly essential, and also to be quite to be open-minded and kind of bold, and that it's exciting to try new things. I guess that sometimes you have to just think, totally differently to make things work, and often even the most experienced people are not sure of the ideas, but it's almost having the confidence just to try them or to push them. And that is something that I'm trying to learn, because often you have the idea in you, and it just takes the confidence to say it, and even if it sounds utterly ridiculous, that's kind of okay. And some things you try and it works, and sometimes it doesn't, and I think not to take that too personally. I think.
How do you set up, like, when you're going to say this project that you're working on right now? Obviously, there are variables that you can't foresee that come into play. How do you set up the kind of the progression of a documentary when you set out to make one?
I guess it depends, doesn't it, in a way. I mean, you know that when you're working for a UK broadcaster, if it's for the BBC or Channel 4 or whatever, you have to be realistic as well, that there is a budget that's set, and there'll be a delivery date. So the creative process is amazing, but unfortunately there's also a kind of business element as well to it. So it's not just all some artistic process and you start going off and doing whatever you want and trying all these ideas that may or may not work. You are unfortunately often restricted by money and the time it takes, and you have to work in those constraints. But often you have a dialogue going with brilliant commissioners throughout, and they will be happy to kind of embrace new ideas along the way. Or maybe if it changes direction. But for example, the Manchester bomb film, we started making that, and it was a company called Blakeway North, actually back in Manchester, who had the idea to make a film about the terrorist attack in Manchester. And to go back to the girls who were there and for them to tell the story of what happened. And it was kind of retelling of it, down the lens interviews, the kind of clear story of that night. And it was only when we started meeting them and I started talking to these girls and their families, we started meeting them in the September. The terrorist attack had happened at the end of May. That is only a few months. And actually what we realised very quickly were these girls were still suffering from PTSD and trauma. And it was very evident. They were not in a position to be able to analyse their own feelings. One, they were too young and they were in the midst of they were still suffering these traumatic symptoms. So it became very apparent actually the more interesting film is probably exploring that and going with that and capturing as a sense of what they're going through now, rather than just a pure retelling of it. And so the BBC were amazing, were really, really brilliant at kind of listening to that and responding to that, and we were allowed to do that because actually it became, I thought, more interesting. Everyone knew the story a little bit, and the girls were quite incredible, speaking to girls of that age about what they were going through, and they were incredibly open, and we built a good relationship. And I guess now I'm working on a film that's a legal case that was in the Court of Appeal last week, and there was meant to be a conclusion as to whether a woman would stay in prison for another 10 years or be released, and her conviction overturned to manslaughter. And that result was meant to come on Thursday. Actually, neither of those things happened, and what they've said is there's got to be an entire retrial.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that
you've been making that already for 6 months?
Yeah,
or something? Yeah.
So we've been working on it since September. The plan was to, the edit has started to make this single film. the appeal was originally meant to be in November, pushed back to January, pushed back to February, and now we have to wait for a retrial. The story actually has ended up being far more interesting, far bigger than what we originally thought it was, and really, really gripping and interesting on the kind of societal level. So there's a question around whether it's still a 160-minute film or, you know, a different configuration. But then there's also, you know, people that we need to pick up interviews with. Many of them we now can't do until the trial is complete, and we will need to capture a sense of what's going on around the trial. And we were told today by the lawyer, you know, when will the trial happen? They said, well, how long's a piece of string?
Yeah.
So in terms of the budget and schedule, it changes a lot. So then you kind of have to adapt and try and figure out what is possible.
It's pretty crazy. And then once, I mean, you said that something was already in the edit, I guess, for the idea of it being a one-off feature. But as it kind of shifts and moves, there's obviously going to be a certain level of adaptation. Once you've got everything in the can, is there, like, do you have a particular process that you like to adhere to, or is it on a kind of case-by-case basis as to how the edit unfolds?
Well, it's quite interesting because this will only be my second edit.
Right.
So So I've been involved in edits as a producer, in terms of like working throughout them and being there to the end, but not in there every single day. So that was quite a kind of daunting prospect, but it's a brilliant process. It's utterly. It's really, really, really exciting to be in it. But you know, I guess editors work in different ways. And the editor I worked with on the Manchester Bomb film, you know, we were kind of in there every day, looking at kind of word by word and getting it down these rabbit holes quite often. And I guess because of my lack of experience, sometimes I couldn't see things kind of how to fix the structural problems or the bigger overview problems, because I don't have the edit experience in that way. So I can remember what people had said or what I found interesting and what should go in the film, but it needed kind of execs, you know, commissioners to come in and help with that. And I think it varies. So on that film, the editor, we were in there a lot of the time together, apart from the first couple of weeks when I was still filming. But this, at the moment, we're also working with a brilliant editor called Joe Carey, who's extremely experienced and is totally brilliant. And he, because of the schedule change as well, but he's kind of Joe is in the zone, like kind of watching all the rushes and getting up to speed, and actually seems to just be in there on his own at the moment and coming at it with that totally different perspective. I think because we're so, you know, we're immersed in the film and are talking to people every day, whereas for him it's that totally different point of view because he's just got the rushes in front of him, rather than thinking, oh, it could be this, or some person told me this but they won't be on camera, but we might get them on camera. He's not thinking that way. So obviously that's extremely helpful.
How do you feel as though you said before that when you started, your kind of aspiration was to be making these films that you're now making?
Yes.
How would you define success now versus how you might have defined it when you were at film school or journalist school?
That's quite a challenging question. It's hard, isn't it? Because if someone had told me, I'd be directing now and making films for the BBC, you know, making really interesting, powerful films, I wouldn't quite believe it. Like I would have been kind of so grateful, and I guess there is a feeling of that. And now the imposter syndrome is kind of back, and we'll probably be around for, you know, there's a feeling of, oh gosh, I don't know if I'm quite good enough. I'll just keep working hard, and people around me, you know, senior people are saying, no, you're doing a good job. But I guess you don't quite, you know, it's hard. When you've not got all the experience, I think it probably takes like 5 years to get to the point where you're like, oh no, I kind of know what I'm doing. And then even I'm not sure if if directors do feel like that all the time, because every project is so different. But I guess in terms of success, I don't really I'm not the kind of person to think in 5 years or in 10 years I want to be in at a certain level or in a certain role and earning a lot of money. I just always thought, gosh, I'd love to be working on incredible films. The directing element seemed an amazing thing to do, but so out of reach. I guess success, I'd just say, for me, would be to genuinely to keep working on films that I genuinely think are important and I'm passionate about, and where there's an element of uncertainty. I quite like that. I don't quite like knowing what it's going to be at the beginning. I really love that, actually. And so I guess I just have to keep doing that and trying hard to keep the imposter syndrome at bay and just like push that right down.
Yeah.
Right down and just think, it's okay, and over time the kind of confidence will build. But it's exciting, like it feels really, really exciting. I think that fear, when I've spoken to directors that are extremely successful, they've said a mix of things, and they're like, they said they feel petrified all the time, and it keeps you motivated and probably keeps you desperate to do the best job you can do, rather than being complacent. And also it's hard, isn't it? Because people are like, oh, how do you measure success? And I worked on films that have been nominated for BAFTAs and things like that, and I guess at one point, that's amazing. It does feel amazing, and like my mum loves, she loved it when I went to the ceremony and things like that, but then you realise it's almost an element of kind of, you can't define success by awards and things like that, because sometimes you're lucky with how a film unfolds and you were just there to capture an amazing story, and it just, I don't think you should. A really, really brilliant documentary maker said to me once, he was like, just don't try not to take any notice of awards. I mean, he might have been saying that because he'd won like all of them, but he was like, just don't think about that, and think about the long-term reputation of a film and how, the power the film has beyond all that. Because people get excited about things, don't they? In the moment. But I guess if you're really proud of the films you've made in the past, then that's a pretty great position to be in, I think.
And we're lucky that we're currently in the midst of a golden era of documentary filmmaking.
Yeah, I think it's quite exciting. Yeah, that idea that people don't like documentaries, or you can't go into forensic detail and really extrapolate out. It's kind of, it's a myth now, isn't it? It's like people have really got an appetite for it, and so you can kind of delve even deeper. And I just do, for whatever reason, the films that I've tended to work on a lot of the time are quite, the subject matter is heavy. Someone did say that, like, you do tend to pick really depressing subjects, but actually then it's not depressing, it's interesting. It's subjects where you don't quite know what you think, or you think you know something about a subject, and then you can start to explore it and you realise actually you don't at all.
Maybe challenging is a better word than depressing.
Yeah, challenging, certainly, exactly. And that idea that people might go into it thinking it's depressing, but actually it might be a subject that that isn't at all.
It changes their mind or their perception about something.
I think so. Yeah. I think someone said that to me once before, an exec I work with, he was like, you should really think about subjects where people think they know what they think, and then you're enabling, you go in and you can pull them in a different direction. And it's not telling them what to think. It pulls them in the direction back and forth throughout the whole film, and then leaves them, wanting to debate it or talk about it. There's lots of unanswered questions. And I think that's something that I really took on. And I was like, you don't want to be forcing an opinion necessarily down people's throats.
No, you want people to lean in, not feel spoon-fed.
Yeah.
Well, Lizzie, thank you so much for having my second PubCast with me. I didn't get you a drink, so I feel like I'm going to have to get you one.
So it's fine, I've still got the dregs of a Diet Coke.
Yeah. I finish all of my conversations with the same question, which is, I was told last week I should probably put in the middle, not the end of the conversation. But anyway, the question is, what makes you silly?
What makes me what, sorry?
Silly.
Silly?
Yeah.
What makes me silly? A lot of things. That is a random question.
Yeah.
I'm quite easy to make silly. I think that, yeah. Right, lots of things make me silly, but I think maybe that's something. I think there's that kind of silliness, or some people have said to me, you've got quite a disarming manner, maybe because I seem a bit silly or less authoritative, which worries me sometimes. But
as you wear leopard print pants, trousers. Sorry, yeah. Keep getting that wrong.
I look quite young, but yeah, I'd say a lot of things make me silly, and I think sometimes when you're allowed to be silly making films and stuff, and I think if contributors know that you're human and you've got you can relax and be normal, it's quite disarming. I think that's
especially if they're
quite
like
helping.
Especially if they're like heavily weighted films.
Yeah, I don't think you should kind of take yourself too seriously at all.
Yeah.
I just really don't, and don't think as some director that you're keep that pretentious language to a minimum, because actually you're able to make amazing films because for some reason people are extremely generous in allowing you to film with them. But yeah, sometimes I guess you do have to be quite silly on your days off.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Liz.
Thank you.